There are around 195 countries on Earth. Some are big, some are small, but they all have one thing in common: borders. Most of the time, these borders are clearly defined, but in many parts of the world, they can be incredibly complex, strange, and hard to understand. In this video, I've gathered 10 of the strangest borders I could find, and I'll try to explain why they look the way they do.
The first on our list is Bösingen am Hochrhein. This tiny town belongs to Germany, but there's just one strange detail: it's completely surrounded by Switzerland. In fact, if you want to drive from Bösingen to the rest of Germany, you first have to cross the Swiss border. So how did a German town end up isolated inside another country? The story goes back more than 300 years, when this region was part of the Holy Roman Empire, a patchwork of hundreds of small states, cities, and noble territories. At the time, Bösingen was controlled by the Austrian Habsburgs, while the surrounding lands increasingly came under the influence of the Swiss city of Schaffhausen. In 1693, a major conflict erupted when the Austrian bailiff Eberhard im Thurn, who governed Bösingen, was kidnapped by local rebels supported by authorities from Schaffhausen. The incident triggered a long political dispute between Austria and the Swiss city, and although many nearby territories later became part of Switzerland, Bösingen remained under Austrian control, laying the foundation for the strange enclave that exists today. After World War I, the residents actually voted on whether they wanted to join Switzerland. In an overwhelming result, about 96% voted yes, but despite the vote, the border never changed. Switzerland demanded a territorial exchange that Germany refused, and the tiny enclave remained German. Today, Bösingen still has one of the strangest border arrangements in Europe. Although it is officially part of Germany, it lies inside the Swiss customs area, meaning goods move freely with Switzerland. Residents often use the Swiss franc, Swiss phone networks, and Swiss postal services. In many ways, daily life there feels more Swiss than German. Next on the list is the Wakhan Corridor, one of the strangest and most isolated border regions on Earth. This narrow strip of land belongs to Afghanistan, but it stretches for about 350 kilometers deep into Central Asia like a long finger, squeezed between Tajikistan to the north and Pakistan to the south, until it finally touches China in the Far East. However, the situation is even more complicated. India also claims that it shares a small border with Afghanistan through the disputed Kashmir region. India considers the northern part of Kashmir to be its territory, which would technically create a short Afghanistan-India border along the edge of the Wakhan Corridor, although in reality this area is currently controlled by Pakistan. On the map, it almost looks like someone simply drew a thin line across the mountains. But this strange shape is actually the result of one of the biggest geopolitical rivalries of the 19th century. During the so-called Great Game, the Russian Empire and the United Kingdom competed for influence across Central Asia. Russia was expanding southward, while Britain controlled British India and feared that Russian forces might one day threaten it. To prevent the two empires from sharing a direct border, diplomats created a buffer zone. In the late 1800s, the Wakhan Corridor was assigned to Afghanistan, forming a thin strip of land that physically separated Russian-controlled Central Asia from British India. The result was one of the most unusual borders on Earth. Today, the corridor runs through some of the highest mountains in the world, between the Pamir Mountains and the Hindu Kush, and it is one of the most remote inhabited regions on the planet. At the very end of the corridor lies another fascinating border, the 92-kilometer-long boundary between Afghanistan and China, high in the mountains at the Wakjir Pass. What makes this border particularly strange is time itself. Afghanistan uses the time zone UTC plus 430, while China uses a single nationwide time zone, UTC plus 8. That means crossing this border creates the largest land-based time difference anywhere on Earth, a jump of 3.5 hours. So in theory, you could walk across the mountains from Afghanistan into China and instantly move several hours into the future. Next on the list is Point Roberts, one of the strangest border quirks between the United States and Canada. Point Roberts is a small American community located at the very southern tip of a peninsula. But there's one unusual problem. It's completely cut off from the rest of the United States by land. To reach it by car from the US, you first have to drive through Canada. This odd situation exists because of a simple line drawn on a map in the 19th century. After tensions between Britain and the United States over the Pacific Northwest, the two sides signed the Oregon Treaty in 1846. The agreement established the border west of the Rocky Mountains along the 49th parallel north, a perfectly straight latitude line separating British and American territory. It sounded simple enough, just follow the line across the continent. But when the line reached the Pacific coast, nobody had paid much attention to the complicated coastline. The 49th parallel sliced right through the Tsawwassen Peninsula, leaving its southern tip on the American side while the rest of the peninsula remained part of Canada. That small southern tip became Point Roberts. Today, the town is home to about 1,000 residents and everyday life depends heavily on nearby Canada. The closest major city is actually Vancouver, just a short drive away, while the nearest American city, Bellingham, requires crossing the border twice. Next on the list is one of the most confusing border points in the world, the almost quadrupoint between Botswana, Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. A quadrupoint is a place where four countries meet at a single point. At first glance, the map of southern Africa makes it look like that's exactly what happens near the town of Kazungula, along the Zambezi River. But in reality, the four countries don't actually meet at the same point. Instead, Botswana and Zambia share a tiny border only about 150 meters long, separating Namibia and Zimbabwe. This means there is no true four-country meeting point, just two separate tri-points extremely close to each other. Part of the reason for this strange situation is the unusual shape of the Caprivi Strip, a narrow finger of land that extends from Namibia far to the east. This strip exists because of a colonial deal in 1890, when the German Empire and the United Kingdom signed the Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty. As part of the agreement, Germany recognized the British protectorate over Zanzibar. In return, Germany received several territorial adjustments in Africa, including access to a narrow corridor reaching the Zambezi River. Germany wanted this corridor because it hoped the Zambezi River could serve as a transportation route from its colony of German Southwest Africa, today's Namibia, to the east coast of Africa and the Indian Ocean. The idea was that ships could travel along the river and connect Germany's inland territories to major trade routes. To make that possible, the borders of the colony were extended far to the east, creating the long and narrow Caprivi Strip. However, the plan quickly proved unrealistic. The river route was blocked by the massive Victoria Falls, which makes navigation along the Zambezi impossible beyond that point, meaning the corridor never provided the access Germany had hoped for. But the strange border remained, and it helped create the confusing near quadrupoint that exists today. Next one is Merkit, a tiny rocky island in the Baltic Sea that has one of the most bizarre borders in the world. The island is shared between Finland and Sweden, but instead of a simple straight line dividing the island, the border makes a strange zigzag pattern, almost like a staircase drawn across the rock. So why does such a tiny island have such a complicated border? The story begins in 1885 when Finland, which at the time was part of the Russian Empire, decided to build a lighthouse on Merkit to help ships navigate the narrow waters of the Åland Sea. There was just one problem. The best location for the lighthouse happened to be on the Swedish side of the island, but the builders didn't realize this at the time, so the lighthouse was constructed in the wrong country. For decades, the mistake remained unresolved. The lighthouse stood on Swedish territory, but it was operated and maintained by Finland. Finally, in 1985, the two countries decided to fix the situation. Instead of moving the lighthouse, Finland and Sweden agreed to redraw the border across the island. But they wanted to make sure that neither country gained or lost land, so they created a carefully measured zigzag border that shifted the territory around the lighthouse while keeping the total area of each country the same. The result is one of the strangest borders on Earth. Today, the lighthouse still stands there, marking the reason why this tiny island in the Baltic Sea has such a weird and unforgettable border. The sixth on our list is Baarle-Hertog, a place so famously confusing that even locals sometimes struggle to explain it. Baarle-Hertog is a Belgian municipality located in the Netherlands, but it's far from a simple exclave. In fact, It consists of dozens of small Belgian exclaves scattered across the Dutch province of North Brabant. And if that wasn't confusing enough, some of these Belgian exclaves even contain Dutch second-order enclaves, tiny pieces of the Netherlands completely surrounded by Belgian territory which itself is inside the Netherlands. The story goes back to the medieval period, around the 12th and 13th centuries. The area was divided between various lords and duchies, and over time, land was sold, inherited, and traded in tiny parcels. One lord might own a few fields here, another a house there, sometimes overlapping with different territories. When modern nation-states like Belgium and the Netherlands formed, these ancient land divisions were respected, creating the current patchwork. Instead of forcing everyone into clean borders, the old property lines became international borders. The result? Streets where one side of the road belongs to Belgium and the other to the Netherlands, houses split down the middle by the border, and even cafes and shops that must follow the laws of the country their front door is in. In some cases, people have moved front doors just a few meters to avoid certain taxes or regulations. Baarle-Hertog is a living example of how history, feudal land deals, and modern borders can collide to create one of the most intricate and mind-bending territorial puzzles in the world. Next on the list, we move to perhaps the most complicated series of borders anywhere in the world. This incredible geopolitical puzzle in Central Asia between Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. At first glance, the borders in this region might look messy, but when you zoom in, the situation becomes almost unbelievable. There are 4 Uzbek enclaves located entirely inside Kyrgyzstan, 1 Kyrgyz enclave inside Uzbekistan, 2 Tajik enclaves inside Kyrgyzstan, and 1 more Tajik enclave inside Uzbekistan. So how did such a bizarre patchwork appear? Back in the 1920s and 30s, when this region was part of the Soviet Union, authorities redrew the borders between the Central Asian republics. The goal was to divide the region into separate Soviet republics. But these borders were often drawn with political strategy rather than geography in mind. Ethnic groups were intentionally mixed together, and territories were divided in strange ways to prevent any region from becoming too unified or independent. At the time, it didn't seem like a huge problem, because everything was still inside the Soviet Union. Crossing these borders was mostly an administrative matter. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, these internal lines suddenly became international borders, leaving behind one of the most complicated enclave systems on Earth. And some of these enclaves are particularly awkward. But perhaps the strangest of them all is Sok. Sok is officially part of Uzbekistan, yet it is completely surrounded by Kyrgyzstan. Even stranger, about 99% of the population living inside Sok are ethnic Tajiks, meaning the enclave belongs to one country, is surrounded by another, and is populated mostly by people from a third. It's one of the most confusing geopolitical arrangements anywhere in the world. However, after decades of tensions and occasional border clashes, the situation has recently begun to improve. In March 2025, these 3 countries reached a major border agreement aimed at finally resolving many of these long-standing territorial disputes. Next on the list, we move to the southern edge of Europe, to a series of small but highly unusual borders between Spain and Morocco, known as the Plazas de Soberanía. At first glance, it might sound strange that Spain has land borders with Morocco at all. After all, Spain is in Europe and Morocco is in Africa. But scattered along the northern coast of Morocco are several tiny Spanish territories that have remained under Spanish control for centuries. The most famous of these are the Spanish cities of Ceuta and Melilla, both located directly on the African mainland. These cities form 2 of the only land borders between Europe and Africa, separated from Morocco by heavily fortified fences. But beyond these 2 cities, there are also several much smaller Spanish territories along the Moroccan coast, known collectively as the Plazas de Soberanía, or places of sovereignty. These include tiny islands and rocky outposts such as Peñón de Vélez de la Gomera, Peñón de Alucemas, and the Chafarinas Islands. One of them is particularly bizarre. Peñón de Vélez de la Gomera used to be a small island off the Moroccan coast, but after a massive storm in 1930, sand and sediment built up between the island and the mainland, creating a narrow strip of land. That natural event accidentally created one of the shortest international land borders in the world, a tiny 85-meter border between Spain and Morocco. Morocco, however, still claims sovereignty over them, which means these tiny rocks and enclaves remain politically sensitive borders between Europe and Africa. A good example of this is Perejil Island, which in 2002 was occupied by 12 Moroccan soldiers who landed on the island and raised the Moroccan flag. This quickly sparked an international crisis, with the Arab League supporting Morocco, while the European Union and NATO backed Spain. A few days later, Spain launched a military operation supported by warships. Spanish special forces landed on the island by helicopter, arrested the 12 Moroccan soldiers without firing a single shot, and restored Spanish control. Today, the island is closely monitored from both sides to maintain the status quo, leaving it deserted and essentially a small no-man's land. Next on the list is Pheasant Island, a tiny island with one of the most unusual border arrangements in the world. The island sits in the middle of the Bidasoa River, right on the border between Spain and France, between the towns of Irun and Hendaye. What makes this island so unique is that it is the smallest condominium in the world. In international law, a condominium is a territory that is jointly governed by two countries. But Pheasant Island takes this concept even further. Instead of both countries ruling it at the same time, the island actually changes countries every 6 months. From February to July, it is administered by Spain, and from August to January, it is administered by France. This unusual system dates back to 1659, when Spain and France signed the Treaty of the Pyrenees, which officially ended a long war between the two kingdoms. The negotiations for the treaty were held right on this small island, chosen because it sat directly between the two countries and was considered neutral ground. As part of the agreement, the island was placed under shared sovereignty, creating the rotating administration system that still exists today. Interestingly, the island is completely uninhabited and normally closed to the public. Its only real purpose today is historical. It serves as a symbol of cooperation between France and Spain. And finally, the 10th and last border on our list brings us to a strange legal gray zone along the Danube River between Serbia and Croatia. After the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s, the two countries inherited a border dispute along the Danube. The disagreement comes from how the border should be drawn. Croatia argues that the border should follow historic land boundaries from old cadastral maps, while Serbia claims the border should follow the current course of the Danube River, which has shifted over time. Because the river has changed its path over the centuries, these two interpretations leave several pockets of land claimed by both countries, and a few small areas claimed by neither. One of those pieces of land is a small, 7-square-kilometer patch on the west bank of the Danube called Gornja Siga. In 2015, a Czech libertarian politician named Vít Jedlička declared this territory to be a new country called Liberland. He argued that since neither Serbia nor Croatia officially claims the land, it qualifies as terra nullius, land belonging to no state. The project attracted huge international attention online, with hundreds of thousands of people applying for citizenship. However, in reality, the country doesn't function. Both Croatia and Serbia prevent people from settling there, and the territory remains effectively inaccessible. If you want to claim this land yourself, check out my video on how to create your own country. While researching this video, I realized there are still so many more crazy and unbelievable borders out there, so there will definitely be a part 2 coming soon. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel by clicking here, and I hope to see you again next Friday for a brand new video. Until then, have a great week.